Thank you, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to our regular Tuesday night town hall. Although this one is not regular in any way whatsoever, I am in my office, which is really fabulous, and with people on the screen who have been dynamic icons in the climate movement for for a very short time, meaning me, and some for a very long time, like Varshini, her entire life, and Jane, and the secretary, Jane Fonda, and the administrator of the EPA, Michael Regan. And so you can see we're joined by this amazing panel: EPA Administrator Michael Regan, Fire Joe Friday's founder, activist, and icon to all of us, at least to me, Jane Fonda, and the co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, Varshini Prakash. And this is a true labor climate agenda coming together. So each of us are going to give a few brief remarks, and then we're going to take questions. And you can do some questions to the comment section as well, and we'll try to curate, navigate them, and be able to answer as many as we can. And Administrator Regan, Commissioner Regan, will not be able to be with us for the whole hour, so I'll cover his questions first, and please excuse him when he has to leave. Also, if you text THRIVE, THRIVE, to 69238, THRIVE to 69238, you can join our lists, take action, and get more information. Because in the coming months, if we're going to actually do this and really make a fundamental change, bold change to our climate and to our climate sustainability, we're going to need to have a lot of organizing conversations with people in our communities, with people on this Zoom and this Facebook Live, and we're going to need to be all in. So we're asking all of you to join our rapid response action team so you can take action, be up to date, and do this with the whole community of climate activists. Climate issues impact everything we do, everything. And so does justice. And justice is our middle name. It is the lens by which we do all of our work. Climate justice is racial justice. It is worker justice. It is gender justice. And if you don't need another reminder of it, Earth Day is right around the corner. So is Workers' Memorial Day, and so is May Day. And we're trying to build together a climate labor coalition. Think about it. As the people who teach kids, care for our patients, keep our communities safe, we are at the crossroads of standing up for a stronger, fairer democracy, a cleaner, more livable planet, and a more just, sustainable economy, of helping build towards a world where all of this can happen and where all of this can thrive. As many of you know, our whole focus this year as the AFT is the freedom for all to thrive. And our movements have to be intersectional and intersected, because one justice movement doesn't survive without the others. Ultimately, you all play a critical role in making that a reality. As I've said often, if we want kids to be able to breathe clean air, we need to be about a climate agenda. If we want kids to be able to drink clean water, we need to be about a climate agenda. If we want to stop all of these excessive weather experiences, we need to be about a climate agenda. And it has to go beyond rhetoric. It can't just be a word. It can't just be a saying. It has to be an actionable agenda, real steps to make the planet habitable. We've been talking about this for a long time, but at this moment in time, if we don't take action, we may not have any recourse. And at the same time, we have a president who wants to actually make this a jobs agenda, an infrastructure agenda. When we talk about the Thrive Act, people see the connections together. We know that a real economy, a real recovery from the economic crisis, from the pandemic. All of these things need and require a real attention to climate. And it's urgent. Carbon dioxide and methane levels in the atmosphere continue to rise in 2020, with carbon dioxide levels reaching the highest point in 3.6 million years. Now, I'm a social studies teacher, but even I know 3.6 million years is a lot of years. And that's not my data. It comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Ultimately, CO2 levels are so high in school classrooms, it makes it difficult for students to learn and absorb information. It's part of why kids fall asleep in class, as well as because of poor ventilation. Fossil fuel air pollution causes nearly 1 in 5 deaths worldwide each year. And frankly, we see it in worse and worse and worse in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. So I could go on, but the bottom line is people see this happening right before their eyes, the extreme weather events, the rising temperatures. We see it in terms of the air we breathe and the water that we drink. We see it in terms of water fountains in schools. We see it in terms of the pollutants on the Cross Bronx Expressway. So you'll be hearing from these amazing icons and experts about what we need to do to change this. We can change this. We already have a president that wants to. He appointed an amazing administrator who's been dedicated his life to it. The Sunrise Movement, when they started with the Thrive Agenda, nobody believed it could be a possibility except probably Varshini. And then look what is happening now. And then Jane Fonda has been on this case as well as every justice case we know she's been she's been the canary in the coal mine, making sure we know what we need to do. And now we are finally listening to her. So ultimately, let me start by asking EPA Administrator Michael Regan to make some opening remarks. But the bottom line is, to thrive, we must be intersectional and take care of our climate. And in taking care of our climate, we can have a new generation of jobs, a new generation of opportunities, and do it in a way that we will have for generation after generation, a thriving planet. And with that, let me turn it over to Michael Regan.
Well, thank you, Randi. It's so good to see you again. And listen, I should talk to you every morning before I start my day. Your passion is unmistakable. And you've been such an important leader, bringing AFT into the fold on environmental issues, and especially on climate change. So again, thank you for your leadership. I also want to recognize the incredible work being done by my co-panelists, Jane Fonda and Varshini Prakash, sparking a national conversation, not only about climate change, but about the kind of world we want to create for future generations. Jane, you've been such a fierce advocate, using your powerful voice and your platform to convey the urgency of the climate crisis for some time now. You've protested, you've engaged in civil disobedience, you've written a book. There's no doubt that your message is penetrating throughout Hollywood and throughout the world. So I also want to thank you for all that you've done through Fire Drill Fridays. What a great concept. And Varshini, I continue to be truly inspired by your leadership and the entire Sunrise movement. Earlier this week, I met with a group of young leaders, including Wally Mazon from Sunrise, who are using their moral authority to grab the attention of leaders all around the world, who are speaking truth to power, and who are courageously demanding action on climate change. We've arrived at this moment where climate change is now front and center to the White House's agenda because of the tireless work of Sunrise and other young people who are standing up and speaking out and who are fighting like their futures depend on it, because they do. So this moment belongs to all of you. And our work at EPA is just beginning. But there's one thing for certain. We still need all of your courage, all of your compassion, your sense of justice, your ambition, and we're going to need all of this for the long haul. And that's why this conversation is so important to EPA, and that's why this conversation is so important to me. We need to continue to invest in the next generation of environmental stewards. The classroom is such a critical place to begin to nurture that curiosity, to challenge and inspire our children, and to give them the knowledge necessary to go out and make change in their own communities and beyond, just as Varshini and her colleagues are already doing. We also need to give our teachers, the very people who are molding our young minds, the resources to integrate climate change and environmental learning into their curriculums. For decades, EPA has had an Office of Environmental Education, but it's been relegated to the back burner for far too long. But that will change under my leadership, and it has to change because environmental education is essential to fulfilling EPA's mission. At EPA, we know that climate literacy is only one side of the equation. Our kids spend 30 hours a week in the classroom. We need to ensure that all of our children, regardless of the color of their skin, how much money they may have in their pockets, or their zip codes, have safe, healthy places to learn. That's a top priority for me, and it's also a top priority for President Biden, who has made tackling climate change, advancing environmental justice, and modernizing our water infrastructure pillars of his administration's agenda to rebuild stronger, more sustainably, and more equitably. So we're going to continue to leverage our relationships with AFT, with the National Education Association, the National Environmental Education Foundation, and others like Jane and Varshini to bolster climate literacy in the classroom and protect all of our children from environmental hazard and environmental harm. I'm excited about our partnership in this conversation today with all of you, because I know together we will chart the kind of future that our children deserve. So thank you all.
Mr. Administrator, and thank you for being with us, and thank you for being so intrepid, and for really making sure that this is close over and over again, that it's going to be close to the heart of the White House each and every day. We, the two next speakers, I've already, talked about them a bit, but let me just say this. Jane Fonda understands how to leverage celebrity. She understands how to make sure that an issue is out there. And whether it is whatever issue it has been, including Working America and working with working people, I just am so grateful to you for taking that celebrity and not sitting down and just saying, okay, I've, done a lot of work in my life. Every single Friday, you make sure that we raise these issues with Fire Drill Fridays, patterned after Moral Mondays. And we can't thank you enough for the work that you have done for all of us to actually make a better world. And with that, one of my favorite people in life, Jane Fonda.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Randi, and thank you, AFT, for inviting me to join this conversation about the very exciting and very, very important Thrive agenda. It's really an honor to be with all of you. Let me just start by adding on to the context that Randi has already given. 2.8 million people have died so far from COVID in the last 15 months. Over the same time frame, 8.7 million people, 3 times as many, have died from air pollution caused by burning fossil fuel. And this is just one small part of the climate crisis that's rapidly unfolding. But you see, we don't feel the same urgency around climate that we feel around COVID because it's invisible. But the crisis is beyond urgent. Climate is the overarching existential crisis into which is nestled like Russian nestling dolls, all the other crises, the health crisis, the systemic racism, and economic and social justice crisis. The thing about the climate crisis, though, is it's the great multiplier. As the climate crisis worsens, all the other crises are amplified. And if we don't move fast on what science is demanding, the climate crisis may move quickly beyond our control. We don't have the luxury to solve these crises one at a time. and we don't have to. We have the opportunity right now to implement a long-term economic recovery and infrastructure plan that advances bold solutions for climate, health, equity, and opportunity simultaneously. It's the Thrive agenda. Thrive will create millions of good, safe union jobs, putting people back to work, building a climate resilient and equitable economy. Thrive will create healthier communities, especially investing in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, which have been disproportionately harmed by pollution. And Thrive will provide opportunities for workers and communities that are impacted as we transition away from fossil fuels to a clean, renewable energy economy. And this is really, really important. As we phase out of fossil fuels, which is what the science tells us we have to do, we must safeguard the interests of the impacted workers and communities. You know, the climate crisis isn't their fault. These workers do some of the most dangerous jobs in industries that fuel this nation's energy systems for the last 100 years. We need to thank them for this work and then ensure that they move into good union jobs. And there are so many new jobs that need doing, right? In renewable energy, of course, but also building electric vehicle charging stations and a smart grid and light rail and replacing our crumbling infrastructure with new climate resilient ones. And of course, the care economy. Thrive intends to do all this, creating the economy of the future. We must all pitch in to help ensure that Thrive passes. And there's one more thing that we need to do too, to set Thrive up for success. We need to responsibly phase out of fossil fuels with the same level of ambition which Thrive invests in the future, the economy of the future. You know, I like to think of what is needed to solve the climate crisis like a pair of scissors with two blades that are both absolutely essential. You need two blades. One blade cuts the consumption of fossil fuels and builds alternatives. This is what Thrive will do in such bold ways. The other blade cuts the production of fossil fuels, which is essential since our country is far behind the fossil fuel reduction goals set by scientists. To succeed, we must do both. Reduce fossil fuel consumption by passing the Thrive Act that will create millions of good union jobs, building a climate resilient economy, and reduce fossil fuel production with just a just and managed transition from fossil fuels. The combination of both approaches is the winning combination. I founded a project called Fire Drill Fridays. You know, we started in DC protesting weekly to call for bold climate action. Hundreds of people joined us each week. During COVID, we pivoted to online gatherings, and we're still doing that and going strong every week. We've had a number of Fire Drill Fridays devoted to the Thrive agenda, and we're going to have more because Thrive is such a good thing for our country and for our climate. So thank you again to AFT for inviting me to join you today, and thank you for the Green New Deal Network for developing the Thrive agenda. In a moment of escalating climate crisis, the vision and ambition of Thrive is not a moment too soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And speaking of the Thrive agenda, I want and Jane just talked about it in a way that everyone should see its exquisite boldness and vision, because it's not an either or, it is a both and. It is how we actually help make the climate sustainable and how we grow good paying jobs in the United States. We've never done transitions right. And the Thrive agenda contemplates how to do those transitions right. We have transitions all the time, but some of the brilliance in figuring this out is brilliance of youth. And that is the co-founder and executive director of the Sunrise Movement, Varshini Prakash. And so Sunrise is a movement of young people who said, okay, we're just going to do things. We're going to get things done. And they help create the Thrive agenda, and they help create the Green New Deal. And now you see a piece of legislation, not just a concept, that was introduced this year as the Thrive Act. And without further ado, let me introduce Varshini for some remarks.
Yes, thank you so much, Randy. I am extremely grateful and humbled to be with all of you. Thank you, Administrator Regan, for your hard work to build lasting policy. Thank you, Jane, for your bold organizing and being a role model for so many young people. Thank you, Bill, and others who worked really hard to put together this event. And especially thank you to AFT and all of the members and leaders who are watching. I think it's safe to say you all have been our family in this fight for a Green New Deal. You helped pass a resolution for a Green New Deal. You've endorsed and are fighting for Thrive. We've been training our members together, doing political education on how labor and climate can work collaboratively, not competitively. We have striked in the streets and taken action together. And I've seen so many of the ways that you all are leading the charge on climate. So thank you so much. And, you know, we do all of this because we know that your fight is our fight and your future is our future. And we cannot succeed without each other. And I do not want to succeed without each other. You know, as many of you might know, our work is driven by thousands of volunteers. And they know what it's like to work for bosses, to lack adequate health care, adequate pay, basic dignity, know what it's like to be strapped with literally trillions of dollars of student debt. So you have to work 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, or be forced into a gig economy job with no social safety net. And of course, we know what it's like to be kids and be growing up into this really scary, uncertain, and chaotic future, and wondering if everything that we're learning and studying about is worth anything if our planet is going to be in flames. And we know what it's like to live in a country where the power of unions has been relentlessly attacked for decades, and our options to be a part of a organized, powerful labor force is frighteningly diminished. And so when I think of the climate crisis, you know, I think of those young people that I work with. I think of one of our young leaders in Texas whose family moved to Houston after getting displaced by Hurricane Katrina, only to be caught in rising floodwaters when Hurricane Harvey hit her new home. She got hit by the big freeze earlier this year and decided, you know what, enough is enough. She was going to fight back, and she did by taking action against Ted Cruz, who left for Cancun when people were literally dying in the state that he supposedly represents. And now she and others are planning a 40-day trek from New Orleans to Houston to raise awareness about the climate crisis and hold their politicians' feet to the fire to take action. I'm reminded of another leader in the West Coast who, in need of a job, took on odd jobs fighting fires and being a contact tracer when COVID struck. And he's fighting so the government will take responsibility for providing safe jobs, stopping the worst of the climate crisis and ending this pandemic. And so Sunrise formed to give young people like these leaders and thousands more a voice and a path to channeling the injustices that we're facing into our lives, into political power, to take the anger and the grief and the hope that we feel into bringing the crisis to the doorsteps of the most powerful people in the world and pressuring them to deliver the change that we deserve. And so, you know, I am just thrilled that we're talking about the Thrive Act, that we're talking about what it means to invest $10 trillion over 10 years to create 15 million jobs to tackle the climate crisis. There is no path towards a more sustainable, safe, clean, resilient future than to have the rights of workers front and center. We can't do any of the things we need to do: end pollution, deploy renewable energy, build cleaner, safer schools and public transportation and public housing without creating millions of jobs. And those jobs have to be good jobs, family sustaining, have access to a union, have the right to collectively bargain being protected and expanded. And so I'm also excited that we've been partnering on the PRO Act and expanding the right to participate in a union and organize free from harm. And over the next few months, we are going to fight to ensure that the likes of Mitch McConnell and his fossil fuel-backed billionaire friends do not compromise our future and our planet. We are going to organize like hell to make sure and support Joe Biden and his administration and Congress to make good on their campaign trail promises. And have seen so many steps forward. The American Jobs Plan representing a historic step forward, and so grateful for the climate leadership of those like the administrator, and the focus on jobs and justice and economy as being central to climate is key, and in so many ways echoes the values and issues that the Green New Deal talks about. And we cannot let up. We've got to push Congress to go even further. And just last week, over 70 chapters in Sunrise took action demanding their congressional officials back Thrive, direct investments specifically to Black and Brown and tribal and poor communities, increase the scale and urgency in fighting this crisis, and guarantee a job to every person who needs one in this country doing that critical work. So we need this moment in history to be big. We have a lot to deliver for our people. And I couldn't be more honored, honestly, to be working alongside you, arm in arm through this moment. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really humbled.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And, because we've advertised this, we've gotten some questions already. And so I want to address the first couple to Administrator Regan, because he's going to have to leave shortly. But before I do that, we're going to put in Twitter a bunch of resources, one of which is, as well as in the Facebook Live comments, one of which is from Share My Lesson. We have climate change lesson plans and resources. We wouldn't be teachers if we didn't have lesson plans and resources. And part of those resources, though, include a list of how you get involved in the climate movement. And it includes the Sunrise Movement and includes Fire Drill Fridays. So if you're interested in all of that, we have those resources for free in Share My Lesson. And we've been talking a lot about the Thrive Act, and we're going to put a tweet together and a thread together that also makes sure that there's a fact sheet on the Thrive Act so that you can see all the details of that act right now in ways that you can then share it and with others as well. And so my first question, because this is a justice movement as well as a climate movement, and all of these things intersect. And we see, and Jane has said this, and Varshini has said this, and Reverend Barber has said this, but Administrator Regan, you're basically going to be on the hot seat on all of these things. So we know that low wealth communities and communities of color have been disproportionately hurt by extreme weather disasters, by exposure to toxic elements from not only the fossil fuel industry, but from all sorts of other industries beforehand. And in some cases, the recovery efforts or the lack thereof were more damaging than the initial harm. So how do we ensure that the communities who have been most savaged by these economic, environmental, and public health crises, how do we make sure we center them in this recovery?
Randy, excellent question. And I'll have to say this past year has magnified the injustices that Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities have faced for decades. COVID-19 ignited the perfect storm for communities who are on the front lines of pollution, who face higher rates of heart disease and lung disease, whose children are more likely to develop asthma. So I'm really proud that environmental justice is front and center of the White House's agenda and EPA's agenda. And so on day one, President Biden issued an executive order that mandates all executive departments and agencies work to correct entrenched inequities in our laws and policies. Last week, we took initial steps to honor that commitment at EPA, and I directed my entire leadership team to identify ways to ensure that the environmental statutes and policies we implement bring benefits to all individuals and all communities and incorporate environmental just considerations into every aspect of their work. All EPA offices now must also work to strengthen enforcement of violations of cornerstone environmental statutes and civil rights laws in communities that have been overburdened by pollution. We'll also consider, and we're prioritizing, both direct and indirect benefits to underserved communities as we develop requests for grant applications and as we make grant award decisions. You know, our policies, we recognize that our policies are strongest and most effective when they've been informed by the people's lived experiences. And so that's going to require early and more frequent engagement with our communities, including our tribal officials, who are the hardest hit by the impacts of climate change and most affected by EPA's rulemakings, permitting, enforcement, and policy decisions. So we aim to make good on that. And as part of our commitment to advancing environmental justice, we also play a pivotal role in supporting, as you mentioned, a just transition for communities. This role includes the consideration of the impacts of our regulations on workers and their communities that will indeed transition away from fossil fuel-based energy production towards clean, renewable sources of generation and other economic opportunities. So planning and supporting their future prosperity must and will be a central part of all of our thinking from the beginning. Our work will be centered around the needs and the vision of those very communities and their futures. The new jobs, the wealth creation, the stability, and the hope for a more prosperous future must be focused first on reaching these communities, their residents, and their workers.
Now I'm going to ask all three of our speakers, if they wish to answer this question, because I have to ask a school question. You all know that. So it's, you know, there's 98,000 schools in the United States, and we're in virtually every community in some way. Sometimes we may be the only public service in a community. But that is where people kind of learn how to do a whole bunch of things community-wise. And so, and Jane has heard me say this a lot. I often talk about how we make it real by talking about lead pipes and not being able to drink water out of water fountains, what happens when we don't have ventilation systems that work, and what happens in terms of asthmatic kids, not only because of COVID, but what happens on a day-to-day basis in a rural area where school hasn't been fixed in 50 years, or in an urban area. So I'm just asking all of you, what can we do? And let me just add one more factoid. We have public schools have the largest public transit fleets with school buses. There's billions of meals served every year. And so this may be a place where we really can turn things around and that people can see it in real time. So what can we do to transform our schools to ensure that every student and every educator and every family that interacts with the school has clean air, water, and energy? And what can we do together to green America's schools? So let me start with Administrator Regan, and then if Jane and Varshini want to add, we would love that.
Well, again, thank you for that question. Our students and educators spend on average 30 hours a week in the classroom. So it's absolutely critical that we ensure that they're able to learn and teach in safe and healthy places. In communities across the country, it's extremely common for school districts, as you mentioned, to run the largest fleets of vehicles, maintain a tremendous amount of buildings, manage most employees, and serve meals, all in one. So they can have a really big local footprint, but that also means that they have the greatest opportunities for efficiency, pollution reduction, and cost saving, all while providing a safe and healthy place for our children to learn, grow, and thrive. And EPA has a long history of promoting energy efficiency in schools, cleaning up bus fleets, and supporting healthy learning environments. I'm proud to say that as part of President Biden's American Jobs Plan, EPA will lead efforts with the support of the Department of Energy to replace 50,000 diesel transit vehicles and electrify at a minimum 20% of our yellow school bus fleet through the new Clean Buses for Kids program. The president's plan also invests $100 billion to upgrade and build new public schools. This investment will help ensure our schools are safe and healthy places of learning for our kids and work for teachers and other educational professionals by improving indoor air quality and ventilation. These funds will also be used to make our schools safer, invest in cutting edge technologies, energy efficiency, resilient school buildings, and reduce the carbon footprint of many of our schools across the country. So when it comes to water, schools can be a part of the solution to support children's health protections and bolster water resources within their communities. Schools can evaluate opportunities to conserve water by following best management practices from EPA's Water Sense program, which can help save money while conserving water to support local water resources. They can also follow EPA's 3 T's, training, testing, and taking action to help reduce lead in drinking water. And additionally, President Biden's American Jobs Plan calls for 100% removal of lead pipes. The plan will reduce lead in schools and childcare facilities to better protect the health of children and in as many as 400,000 facilities across the country. So there's just so much we can do together, and eliminating all of these antiquated lead lines would protect the health and safety of our future generations. It would also benefit low-income communities and communities of color that have been disproportionately exposed to lead for far too long. So there are huge opportunities for us there.
Well, I know you have to hop, so I'm just going to say thank you, Administrator Regan. Thank you for being in this job, and thank you for the Biden agenda, which we got to get past. I know we got to do more, but we got to get it passed. And thank you for making it so real. We really appreciate you, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be invited and join this esteemed panel. It's the highlight of my day and my week, I'm sure. So thank you all for entertaining me today.
Thank you. And I want to turn it to, I would say first Jane and then Varshini about this question, because it's, because I know both of you have a lot to say about this.
Well, Michael Regan has just covered a lot of territory, and I totally support everything that he said. I would like to add on the importance of school gardens. When children know where food comes from, when they can get their hands in the dirt and grow it themselves and see the miracle of nature, it has a huge impact on them. I spent 20 years in Atlanta working in schools that were, in the middle of food deserts. All around were the possibilities of planting gardens. And there were farmers, all the Black farmers that have had their land taken away. Let's give them back land. Let's have farmers be able to grow food. I'm thinking of Detroit, all the empty lots in Detroit. Those could all be farms with a direct pipeline from farm to school luncheons would make a great difference. And, if we started doing the things that Mr. Regan said and started kids being able to work outside and eat proper food that's not full of sugar. The other thing that we can do is get the police out of schools, because kids are not going to be acting out so much. So those are 2 things that I would add on.
Great. Thank you. And look, I would also say today that we really, with yet another shooting of another innocent Black man, we really, really, really need to mourn and support Mr. Wright's family, given the circumstances. So thank you so much for raising that. And Varshini, what do you think when you think, and it's a little bit, there's a little kind of a, oh my God, listen, this is the administrator of the EPA listing off all the things that are already in an infrastructure plan of a Joe Biden administration within the first 100 days. So I do want to just take a moment and say, these are the things that we would normally be really fighting for. Now we have to fight for its passage. But I want to take a moment to say, that's a BFD.
Yeah.
You know, it may not be enough, but it's a BFD.
No,
so
absolutely.
Varshini.
Yeah, I think the administrator and Jane covered a lot. Something that I'm thinking about, in addition to sort of the policies and greening our schools, is also how are we deeply supporting young people to discover their own agency at this moment in history. This is a crisis that is going to continue for decades. We have locked in to warming that we will not be able to reverse, even though we can stop and inhibit a significant level of damage if we act very, very quickly. But I think a big part of just the environmental policy piece is as well the political education. I remember in high school and middle school, never really learning about democracy aside from government and voting every 4 years, which I wasn't able to do until I was 18. I think, how are we actually educating our young people to because when you ask them what they want, they don't want to be eating unhealthy food. They don't want to be working in poisoned communities. They don't want to be breathing refinery-filled air. These are not things that people choose if they have the option to choose. And how are we empowering young people? And how are unions and social movement organizations and the government and so on deeply empowering people to articulate the vision that they want in the world and then get after it and giving them the tools to do so. And so I think that piece of it, the activation piece, is just as important for the long term as getting some of the policies done as well.
And I mean, I'm glad you raised that. I am going to be giving a speech in a few weeks where we are really focused on thinking about literacy, civics, and science as ways in which one can actually start deepening critical thinking skills, engaging in project-based instruction. And, and while we have to be very careful as educators to not, to be careful about how we present all sides of the equation, we were on one of these town halls a few weeks ago, and Dr. Erwin Redliner talked about how science could be critical to really helping kids learn about uncertainty and how to actually get to answers without misinformation. And frankly, civics, the empowerment and the engagement of young people to see that government can work through the work that they do will be very important, regardless of whether a young person then becomes a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or not, affiliated in any way, form, or manner. But it's a matter of really developing the muscle of having to do that. So I'm really glad you raised those issues because they're really important in terms of just how we help young people develop those kind of skills. So there's I'm leaving the tough questions to the two of you, because the question that anyone in the labor movement always gets is that we have watched a last administration try to create an either or, try to actually say that carbon-free, renewable energy economy would mean the loss of thousands of jobs, and to scare people and to scare them away from actually understanding that long-term a sustainable climate is really, really important for our long-term viability. And ultimately, it's also a way of creating a just transition and so many new jobs. And I think often to the other huge changes. Sorry, I am a social studies teacher. I think often to the other huge changes in our economy, from to the Industrial Revolution, to the technical revolution, where you never saw anyone even talk about a just transition. So both of you have spent a lot of time in both of these movements and or really thinking about it. So how do we address, from your point of view or from your perspective, how do we address the impact on the fossil fuel workers and the communities that rely on them?
Varshini,
Varshini, why do you go first this time?
I'm happy to start. I think this is one of the most important questions that we could be asking. I think we've got to be clear that a transition is going to happen. And the question is, will the transition happen to us, or will the transition happen with us? Will it be a just one, or will it be one in which, mega corporations and CEOs make out like bandits, and many communities are left behind? And to me, the clearest way to tackle that issue is to be proactive, to address it on its head, and not pretend like, it's a thorny issue we just want to leave aside. And to sequence the question of a transition, not as the thing that happens after people lose their jobs or whatever it might be, but actually seed that conversation as one of the first conversations that happens as this transition away from the fossil fuel economy is occurring. And I think the first thing to do whenever we're talking about an economy or a community that we're not from, I'm not a coal worker, I don't work in the fossil fuel industry, is including those individuals in these conversations, asking people, what is it that you need to survive and to thrive? And, things that I have heard in conversations with trade unionists or workers is, the desire for a plan around a just transition that actually meets or exceeds the needs of those workers, not the bare minimum, and to utilize the full force of the government's resources behind that effort. So, to get specific about it, what would it look like to guarantee people 5-year equivalent pay of whatever their job is right now, or the opportunity for early retirement, to ensure that there are benefits for housing, for healthcare, to ensure that pensions are covered, to make sure that there's priority placement for new jobs if people are moving on to other careers, to have real worker retraining and placement after that as well. I think this looks like not just the workers themselves, but what are the economies where these workers are existing, and how can those economies be diversified so they don't have to focus just on coal or extraction as the sole sort of form of employment. And the vast majority of these folks have really been left behind by both political parties over the last few decades, and have not been supported to rebuild their economies and find alternative jobs that pay less and are more that pay more and are more healthy. And so, I think we've got to make it a priority, and it has to be a part of any conversation towards a green economy.
Well, the workers are being done in by and left behind by the very industries they work for. I mean, look what the coal industries did to the coal workers. The mine shut down. There was no protection for the workers. They had their health benefits cut off. These are men who are, suffering with black and brown lung diseases and things like that. Fossil fuel workers are losing their jobs because the fossil fuel industry is going under.
Yep.
I think that we have to understand, and we have to help other people understand, these are bad guys. These are guys who knew what they were doing to other human beings and to the climate for 40 years. Their scientists told them, what we are burning, what you are burning is heating up the atmosphere, and it can cause catastrophe. And it was described in detail what that catastrophe could look like. And they kept right on drilling, and they went and they hired the firms that had worked with the tobacco company to hide the science and lie. And what they said, we know now, because investigative journalists have got the records, and lawyers have the records of internal documents. They said, if we can sow doubt, we win. These are bad guys. I said at the beginning of my talk, how many people have died? That's just from fossil fuel air pollution. They are killing people. And we're giving them $20 billion a year in subsidies. Can you believe that? Can you imagine what $20 billion could do for American schools, Randy? So we have to toxify the fossil fuel industry the way we did the tobacco industry, and understand that whatever they tell us, you can be sure it's greenwashing and it's not true. We also have to understand why fossil fuel workers don't trust the climate and environmental movements or anybody that says we're going through a transition, because workers have never come out of transitions very well. Globalization, NAFTA, all the big international trade agreements, yep. Automation. None of this has been good for workers. So we just have to really buckle up and do everything we can to prove to these workers and communities that we will stand by them, and we will fight, just as we're fighting to phase out of fossil fuels and pass the Thrive agenda, that we will fight for them. We're going to have to prove it to them.
Yep, it is so true. But even having these conversations and being real about it and acknowledging this is really important. I mean, we see it in McDowell County, West Virginia, where you're exactly right, Jane. Where the coal mining industry abandoned this town, and and we've been there for about 10 years, trying to do things to figure out economic development, trying to help put wraparound services around schools, trying to help in terms of instruction, but we need a very robust economic agenda. And Varshini said this, which is not just telling a worker, oh, by the way, go get some training, or we'll provide you some training for a couple of hours. It has to be that robustness in a way that we've never done before.
A big source of jobs is remediating the oil wells, cleaning
exactly.
up lines. It's a skill that the workers already have. The companies are supposed to pay for it. Make them do it before they go bankrupt and saddle us with having to pay for it. But remediation is a big source of jobs.
Exactly right. So it gives me it, and I've been texting because we've looked at the comments. I haven't looked at the comments, but other people, our amazing staff, have been looking at the comments, because I've been saying, is there any other question that I haven't asked or that you didn't, raise at the beginning? And you, Jane, raised the urgency of this moment. I will start using that statistic about how, 8 million people dying. 8 million in the same period of time that 2.8 million died of COVID, because of the invisibility of what happens in terms of air pollutants. And so I'll start because I think we have to make it real to people. But you both have amazing organizations. You both do a lot of work in this arena. And so I just want you to, just shout a little bit, fan mail a little bit about your two organizations. Varshini, why don't you start?
Wait, sorry. What does fan mail mean? Just like talk about
on sunrise.
It means just brag a little bit. I know you don't. Let us be fans.
My God, I gotta say, y'all, I am just blown away by these kids. I am blown away by these kids. Like, I have seen. I just remember the date of, November, whatever it was. And in 2018, when I've got like 200 teenagers and 20 somethings that are like storming into not storming, sorry. not storming, walking very peacefully into the Capitol and holding these signs that say, you know, Congress, what is your plan? What is your plan? And from that date, just seeing this moment of you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all of these politicians joining and rallying for this fight for a Green New Deal, and that kickstarting the participation of like tens of thousands of new people joining the organization and the broader movement. And from there, you know, seeing dozens and dozens of young people showing up at every single presidential rally and event, asking them like, are you taking money from the fossil fuel industry? We need you to stop and swear off of oil and gas, precisely for the reasons that Jane just named and detailed, this sordid history of a fossil fuel driven economy and political climate, and pushing them to, you know, talk about their climate plans and endorse a Green New Deal. And in 2019, it was the first year in history that every single major Democratic candidate submitted a climate plan that was greater than any climate plan that we have ever seen in history. You know, we saw a 7-hour CNN town hall on climate that we had pushed for because we hadn't seen it being talked about in the presidential debates for years. We saw, you know, a presidential candidate who got nominated and pushed on his agenda on climate move from a $1.7 trillion climate plan to a over 10 years to a $2 trillion climate plan over 4 years, with 40% of those investments going to Black and brown communities. You know, we've helped create the Green New Deal Network, which is this phenomenal group of labor organizations, environmental justice and tribal groups, political organizations, youth movements, and so on and so forth, that are collectively organizing for this vision of this 10-year vision of a Green New Deal that is going to transform virtually every sector of our society towards a healthier, safer, more stable climate and environment. And so, you know, I am in awe. Like, even through this pandemic, it has been painful. It has been isolating. It has been scary. And through it all, I mean, to see the like tens of thousands of young people who are still getting trained every day, who are throwing down during the uprisings to protest white supremacy and violence, and the collaborations happening there in the movement for Black Lives and Sunrise, seeing the ways in which young people are getting ready for more and more waves of action over the next few weeks and months to ensure that this infrastructure bill and jobs plan gets passed. I'm in awe, and to see young people who are going through it right now, show up every day with a level of conviction and passion that I have never experienced in my life is just extremely gratifying experience. And so, if you're out there and you're looking to get involved, I want to ask you all to go to sunrisemovement.org. We have more waves of action. We'd love to take action together with all of you. And get involved. Call your congressperson, tell them to support the Thrive Act, tell them to support the millions of young people who are calling on Congress to take action right now. And yeah, I just feel really, I feel excited to be at this moment in history where things feel actually possible, like they haven't felt in the last 4 years.
We're good bookends.
Exactly.
She's mobilizing the young ones, and I'm kind of mobilizing the old folks and the middle folks. There's a very respected research organization at Yale called the Climate Communications Program. You probably know about it. And according to the research they've done, there are 23 million Americans who are alarmed about the climate crisis, but they haven't done anything because nobody's asked them. There are 13 million Americans who would be willing to engage in civil disobedience and risk arrest, and they haven't done it because nobody's asked them. So Fire Drill Fridays is asking them. I work with Greenpeace. It's a program within Greenpeace. I'm the luckiest woman in the whole world to be working with Greenpeace. They are the most amazing, brave, strategic organizers. And we decided that because of who I am and how old I am and the platform I have, we were going to be reaching out to those unasked, the great unasked. And what I found out during the 4 months that we were in DC is that they're hearing. People were coming from all over the country, mostly women, mostly older women, Oregon, Washington, Wisconsin, all over. They had never engaged in civil disobedience before or risked arrest. And they did, and they felt it was transformative. And so, when COVID hit and we took it, virtual, we got real worried because we didn't know whether people would be so distracted by the pandemic. But what Varshini said, I think is really true. They've hung in there. You could see it during the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd. You could see people understanding the intersectionality between these crises. It was wild in California watching this in white communities with people out with Black Lives Matter banners who had never done such a thing before. And the same is true for climate. We had 9 million people following Fire Drill Fridays across all platforms in 2020. Isn't that just amazing?
And it's amazing.
Yeah. So the scientists are saying, which is kind of amazing because scientists don't say things like this, they try to stay neutral under the radar. What's needed to face this unique moment in human history is unprecedented numbers who are willing to go into the streets and step it up and engage in civil disobedience. We can't right now because of COVID, but when the time comes, we have to be sure that we are out there in huge numbers. And I'm just so proud of the work that Greenpeace and Fire Drill Fridays is doing to help increase those numbers.
Wow. Look, it's just so wonderful. I was going to ask both of you to have final thoughts, but I think you both just did this. It is so wonderful to have both of you. I'm going to ask you if you want to give us kind of like a final, sense of how we, engage together in solidarity and unity for this freedom to thrive, for this way of really changing generationally our climate. This once in a generation moment to reset an agenda.
More than a generation.
Yeah, it's probably once in a
lifetime that's alive right now.
Yep. I suspect you are completely right about that. And it's within our grasp. Yes. And the urgency is so intense. And to have both of those things at the same time within our grasp to deal with an urgent problem that if we don't know what we are leaving to the next generations. And so ultimately, I want to just remind people, text THRIVE to, I wish I had my glasses on, 69238. Text THRIVE. Thank you, Brett, for putting it on the screen to 69238. But let me, before I say thank you to everyone for watching, let me just ask, this time Jane first and then Varshini, to give us your last thoughts to this amazing group of watchers. The educators, I need to make one plug for them. The educators, the health providers, the paraprofessionals, the bus drivers, the public employees that are all members of the AFT. They are incredible people who have done so much in this pandemic to try to care for, to feed, to engage our communities. And I am so grateful to all of them and grateful to the two of you and to Administrator Regan for being with them and with us and with this wealth of information and inspiration tonight. So Varshini, last words.
Oh man, I feel like you said it all, but y'all, this is our moment to go for broke. And I cannot overstate the fact that if every single one of us throws down with the extent of the power and prowess and brilliance that we bring to the table, we cannot lose. But we need you in that fight right now and until we can get the justice that our communities deserve. So thank you for everything that you are doing. Thank you for fighting the fight. Thank you for hanging in there over this last year. We got your back. We will be here till the end. And I am just so grateful for everything that you've done and will be doing.
Varshini's right. We are the last generation who can make the difference, who can determine whether there is a livable future for young people. And we need every single one of us to do everything we can. We can't do it as individuals. We do it with our unions. We do it with our organizations like Fire Drill Friday, like Sunrise, like Greenpeace. So please join up in whatever way you can and help us fight for a future.
Thank you so much. We often say one of the credos of the AFT is together we can accomplish what is impossible to do alone. And the two of you and Administrator Regan made that point over and over again in such a crystal clear way and such an inspiring and compelling way. I am so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful for your passion. I'm so grateful that you take this time to do what we need to do to help other people, to help the next generation, to help us have a better America, one that is full of opportunity and one that is full of justice. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being with us today about fighting for climate justice. Thank you.